running webinar series. As always, my name is Evan. I've been your host for this series. Today, we are joined by Will Murray. Will, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited about this. I've been a Stride user from the days when it was a chest strap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've watched my power decline over the years as I've had my Stride. So yeah, no, it's been good.
That's good. And we talked a little bit this morning. You had a nice hill workout earlier today, so you're all stimulated, ready to go. The mental energy is all there, and we're gonna have a really good focused session today. For people that are watching live, you can feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat if you're watching on YouTube, or the comments if you're watching on Facebook. We will also have this available for viewing in video form afterwards on our YouTube channel, as well as podcast audio form wherever you find your podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about practical in-run techniques to defeat negative self-talk and route to triumphant performances with, like we just introduced, Will Murray. Gus always writes the best headlines for these. Producer Gus, who's behind the scenes making all this happen. These topic titles are always my favorite to kind of go through. So Will, we're gonna do a brief intro about you, and then I'll ask maybe you to tell people a little bit about yourself after I give kind of a brief intro of what you do, and then you can give people more of an idea. So you're a mental skills coach for D3 Multisport, a USA Triathlon licensed coach, and training director for the R&R Project. And we'll link any of these links in the show notes or the description for people who want to learn more. The mission is to eliminate post-traumatic stress, PTSD, in our lifetimes. You're an age group triathlete and a co-author of the 4 Pillars of Triathlon, Vital Mental Conditioning for Endurance Athletes. Today, we're going to talk about a few techniques that you can use to defeat negative self-talk. We'll talk about methods that you can use mid-run to stop negative thoughts as soon as they appear. It's crucial to stop negative thoughts early on before they become a distraction. And that stress has an opportunity to manifest itself in your body and have negative effects on your physical performance as well. If you can recognize and quickly stop the negative thought, this will give you the opportunity to allow yourself to create positive thoughts instead, which is key to performing your best. So if that intro got you psyched up, got you jazzed, got you really excited to listen, we're going to have a fantastic, fantastic series today. So Will, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself? You mentioned you've used Stride for years. Obviously, you're in the triathlon world. Obviously, you're in the athletic world. Can you give people just a little bit more information about yourself?
This whole thing started a while ago when I met my wife, and I was running and cycling and that kind of thing, and had done a few marathons and run the Boulder whatnot, and was in the AA wave a couple times. And this is when I was a young guy, and she said, you run and you bike, you should learn how to swim. And it's like, nah, I swim like a box of hammers. I mean, this is my deal. And she said, well, there's this triathlon thing. It's like, oh yeah, no, I've seen that on TV. That's where they crawl in the middle of the night in the dark, drooling and fill their pants and everything, right? She goes, yeah, that's it. It's really great. And I was smitten with her, when I first met her. And so if she just said, let's go eat, broken glass, I would have signed up for that. So the next best alternative was getting into the triathlon world. And then, like everybody, I kind of caught the bug. And what I was noticing about what I saw a lot of things is the physiology seems to be really worked out. The first time, or one of the first times I went to your office, I walked in and there's this giant whiteboard with an erasable marker in blue ink, these strings of equations densely packed one after the other. And I just thought to myself, okay, the physiology is pretty well figured out. I think I might have said to you, I'll give you $5 if you don't try to explain to me what is up on that board, right? But what I didn't see was the mental side of the equation. And if you look at, all the things like VO2 max, if you look at economy, if you look at lactic threshold, and all those things, like that's all there. But the mental side is this whole other equation. I just didn't see the kind of rigor on the mental skills side that I saw on the physiology side, and decided I might want to do something about that.
Yeah, and it's something I feel like is becoming more of a concept that's at the forefront of people's minds. We've talked with a couple other people over this series so far, and not necessarily everybody being really in tune with the mental side of stuff, but people are at least aware that it's a thing now, and so more and more people are curious about it, and we're really excited to talk about more of the mental side today, because yeah, you can do all your training, you can have a high VO2 max, you can raise your lactate threshold, you can train all that stuff, you can train by power, but if you show up on race day and all of a sudden you have something from the mental side get in your way, it doesn't matter all the training that you've done if all of a sudden come that final day for performance, or during training. We can talk about examples like that as well, but it's a side that a lot of people are getting more familiar with now as well. So the kind of outline we have here is some of the stuff we've been sticking to. We're going to have a couple general topics that we're going to talk about. Feel free to expand upon them. And then we'll get to listener questions as they relate during this. But then at the end, if anybody has any questions related to the subject, we'll also tackle those. The first set topic we had today was 3 ways to defeat negative talk. So the first maybe encompassing thing is maybe defining this, right? So what would you define as a negative talk in the concept or in the context of athletics?
Mm-hmm. The thing that most people find is that they will have 1 or 2 or 3 phrases that recur to them that they say in their own heads, privacy of their own mind, that are really not helpful. And so it might be, you're at the track and you have to do a whole bunch of, 600-meter repeats. And it might be in the third one, it's like, oh, I'm not sure that I really need to do all 6. And that one really hurt. And it's just all this negative chatter. And in fact, in some definitions of being above aerobic threshold, where you're actually accumulating lactate faster you can clear it into zone 4, there's where your breathing pace changes, that tempo changes, the respiratory compensation and that kind of thing, and also the feeling in your legs, and also strong internal chatter where you're sort of negotiating with yourself about these things. Or some people wait, a couple days before the race, they start to psych themselves out. They'll start to say, oh, geez, I didn't really get in all my training. But for some people, it's a recurrent thing that usually starts with I or you pointed at this person, like I always or I never or something like that. And I don't know if any of you out there ever have anything like that it's a recurring theme. That's a thing that you say to yourself that's just not helpful. It may be negative, it may not be negative, but it's just not useful. It doesn't help you do what you want to do. So that's one definition that people might put on it.
I find that super interesting, that probably everybody out there can identify it, right? Like if you're maybe shooting for a time trial, hard effort, and we've talked about one of the better ways to pace is the first 1 kilometer, go out slightly under target, ramp up those next couple kilometers and finish hard. But if you have that negative self-talk so early, you look down at your first split and you say, oh my gosh, I'm so behind pace, or I'm so slow, or I'm not, right where I should be. That's definitely something that people can relate to. The maybe thing that I would like to ask you about before we go on to the kind of set question here is there a difference between negative, neutral, and positive self-talk that people might be able to identify with? Because if you're in the middle of a 200-meter repeat, it might be okay to recognize how you feel, as long as you're not saying, oh, my legs hurt so bad. Is it okay to have that kind of neutral talk, or are we only aiming to eliminate negative, self-talk and only bolster that positive side?
Well, I think it's a good question. And the neutral talk is mostly probably just data. like, okay, you, Evan, are at the track and you just did your 400 and it was 58 seconds. And you said, oh, that's 58 seconds. I know, actually you go faster, but I just wanted to use an example here.
Not here at altitude. I find it pretty darn hard for sure.
So that's just a thing, or it's like, well, I can actually feel it in my, like today I was doing these hill sprints and I could feel it in my VMOs, it's like, oh, okay, they showed up. It's just data, right? It doesn't, I don't attach any emotion to it one side or the other. It's like, this is just what I noticed. And that's noticing what you notice. That's, can be pretty useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just you don't want to have that kind of creep towards that negative side of my legs hurt so much and I'm done after this repeat, right?
Right. So there is some people think that what happens is you have some physiological sensation in your body, like my lungs are burning.
Mm-hmm.
And then your brain says, well, what does it mean? Well, it means that I'm light, slow, or, whatever. And then that turns into an emotion, right? You get sad or you get anxious or whatever.
Totally.
And it all happens, neurology happens at the speed of light. It happens like that. So we don't even notice it happens. It's just like all of a sudden I feel like, I'm disappointed or whatever, just because we had this really quick, I felt my legs get tired. My brain said it means you suck. Off you
totally.
go. I'm no good for anything. And you're
totally
swirling down the drain.
So you mentioned that people might have a phrase that, willingly or unwillingly kind of makes its way in. People might have a rotation of phrases that are, kind of on that negative self-talk spectrum. What should you do about a really irritating phrase or self-doubt when it enters your mind? What are some strategies that people can employ?
Yeah, this is pretty key, and there's really two ways to do it. I'll talk about the one when it happens, but then I'll talk about how to not get started in the beginning, right? And if you're driving your car or operating heavy machinery, like don't do this right now. Wait until you listen to the rebroadcast. But one of the things you can do is just some simple things about how sound comes, right? So maybe I would say to myself like, "Oh, I'm no good." Right? That's this thing, and it's this kind of irritating thing, and it pops up, and I agree with it, and all that kind of thing. Well, one thing you can do is take the volume. I don't know if you have a knob for your volume, if you have a slider, right? Whichever one it is. But you say to yourself, and each of you knows what it is, this phrase that you have. So get that phrase, and then just take and slowly turn the volume down to where you can just barely hear it, or turn the slider, and then have it say that thing again, where you can almost just not quite hear it. So do that now. And then when you have it say it again at that almost imperceptible volume, like then how do you feel it? Like how does it impact you? It's just like, right?
Yeah,
so that's one way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like that's something that people could even maybe use in different situations. So you talked about, yes, absolutely not when you're operating a car or heavy machinery, if you're out on a run, or
sure.
This maybe doesn't even apply to during a run, before a run, if you have like anxiety getting out the door, or you're checking your run splits afterwards. Is this something that is equally beneficial, like before, during, and after?
Absolutely. You can do this during your workout. And you can do it before and after. Before is really key. But let me show you an example.
Sure.
I don't know if this will show up.
It should if people are watching live. Yeah, okay. The camera orientation stuff always gets me for trying to show. So
there is my run workout today, and I was supposed to do 6 hill repeats, 1 minute all out, at a 8% hill, which I found one of, and then 2 minutes easy, and then do it again 6 times. Now you notice a couple, you'll see 7 spikes, and that's because sometimes when you're working really hard, you just get stupid, and I couldn't count to 6. So anyway, there's why 7. And if you look at these carefully, you'll see 3 of them look pretty good. One of them looks okay, and 2 or 3 of them don't look that good. That's a mental mistake. That's not conditioning, because you see some of the ones on the other side of it were okay. I lost my concentration.
Mm.
Maybe I had something going on. So in order to actually perform the way I should have been performing,
Mhm.
one of the things I could have done was a little mental rehearsal right before each 1 minute repeat, where I'd kind of gather myself up in the 2 minutes easy and say to myself, okay, what am I trying to do here? This is all out stuff. This is potassium pump work. This is VO2 max work. And how the goods are going to get me on race day is if I can, jump up my VO2 max and my potassium pump work, I'm going to be able to hold higher pace for a longer time on race day. I'll be glad I did it.
Mhm.
I could have said that to myself between each hard interval in my rest interval every time, so that
Mhm.
every one I would have brought my full thing. But for
Mhm.
some reason, I was thinking about something else in 2 or 3 of those, and you can see it, like the stride does not lie. It's
Right.
right there.
Right.
That's
That.
something I could have done in advance. It's pretty hard to do this in your 1 minute all out.
Mhm.
And what I was finding is I was falling off at about 40 seconds, like starting to really struggle there.
Mhm.
But in between, in the workout, I could have regrouped myself between every
Mhm.
one and said, okay, here's what I'm here for, and that kind of thing.
So
Could have done.
yeah. So let's say you had this experience, you had this morning, and your training calendar calls for I don't know. Let's just say instead of 6 times 60-second hills, you have 5 times 70-second hills. Like 3 weeks from now, what would be a strategy that you would employ for yourself, or recommend somebody in the exact same situation to acknowledge and just realize ahead of the workout next time? What could be some of those mental cues? Because you obviously see that, yeah, you did, the set session today, but you lost focus. What could be a sort of encouragement for yourself next time, or a routine to kind of slide into right before a hill repeat? Maybe just a practical example for somebody.
So, Evan, you had Dr. Stephen Walker on last
Mhm.
week, a sports psychologist who talked a lot about things, and he talked about the value of rehearsing things ahead of time. So, there's a spot in your brain right here called Brodmann's area. That's the part of your brain where you store memories of things that have not yet taken place.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Not the mental floss, right?
Yes.
We do this all the time. We think about something that hasn't happened yet, and you can play it in your head different ways. You can catastrophize it. Like, I'm going to show up on race day, I'm going to drop a bottle, I'm going to get a blister, I'm going to get cramped. You can make all those pictures in your head and have that dialogue in your head about something that hasn't happened yet.
Mm.
Or you can install the thing you want to have happen, because our brains are in a way like a good golden retriever. They aim to fetch what you chuck at it.
Right.
So you might as well install in Brodmann's area the thing you want to have happen. So there's a saying here that if you have to think, it's too late, like in
Right.
a race situation. So you want to install all this stuff the way you want it to have it go. So the next time I have this workout, it's going to be 5 times 70 seconds.
Mhm.
Lucky me, because that's where the money is, right?
Right.
What I could do ahead of time, right before I go into it, is make a little picture in my head, a motion picture, dissociated, like I'm watching myself on a movie, of
Mhm.
this workout going perfectly.
Mm.
If I like the way that looks, I would bring it inside and do it associated, like I'm seeing it through my eyes and feeling it through my own skin, and
Mhm.
run that movie 20 to 30 seconds long for a 45-minute workout,
Mhm.
having it go perfectly.
Mhm.
But I also have to tell myself, why am I doing this? Because it's going to hurt, right? And so you say, well, this is a VO2 max workout. I'm working on potassium pump stuff. I'm trying to bump my VO2 max up. If I bump up my VO2 max, it gives me more ceiling for my LT. It's better on race day. Great.
Right.
Okay, right. Because we're all doing this on purpose, even though it's difficult and it's challenging.
Sure.
If I bring my brain along and then I make these images in Brodmann's area, my brain says, oh, I get it, because everybody knows that we are programmed to move away from pain and move towards things that are pleasurable. Well, it's
Mhm.
kind of hard to say that these 70-second, 8% hill sprints are pleasurable, but they're beneficial.
Right.
They're, we strive towards these things. There's something positive in it. So if you bring your brain along and explain these things ahead of time to it and make a picture of it, then your brain says, oh, got it. And so I was at the track a couple of weeks ago doing 1K repeats. And on the sixth one, instead of saying, I don't like this, this is hard, why don't we just do 4?
Mhm.
This voice in the back of my head said, are you going to count that one? It's like, it was like giving me the business for not going hard enough.
Right.
So that's why if you have to think it's too late, you put these
Mhm.
things in your head ahead of time, and then when you go to do it, your brain is looking for the thing it's looking for that you put in Brodmann's area. Instead of the catastrophe, it's looking for this should be really hard. And if it's really hard, it goes, yeah, supposed to be. Let's go. Let's get on the next one.
Right. When we did have Dr. Walker on last week, I related one of my personal experiences was when I had my goal marathon, my second marathon that I did. I had a certain goal that I wanted to do. So every run for like the 9 months leading up to that, I pictured myself like literally every single run. And so then I told him on race day, it wasn't a surprise. It was the outcome that was going to happen because I had visualized it so often. So
Right.
You shouldn't necessarily visualize your 5 times 70-second hill repeats for a year leading up to that workout, but it is very powerful to be able to kind of enact that. I wanted to ask a follow-up here. So you mentioned specifically during training the importance of this self-talk and the pushing away of the negative self-talk. So in the context of actual performance, how much of a limiter is negative self-talk? What kind of performance have you seen athletes achieve once they turn that negative self-talk into that more positive direction?
There's really kind of two sides to this. One is not giving up. And we've seen a whole bunch of people in races that they just like kind of gave up and they phoned in the last half, the last mile, the last whatever. They just kind of quit. And see this a lot with cross country runners in specific because they're just redline right off the bat, and they're just going like crazy, and it's painful the whole time, and you have to really want it to be able to hang in for that period of time at that. And same with Nordic skiers, they're just crazy. They come through the finish line with snot all over their faces because they can't wipe their nose because they've got their poles, and they fall in the snow because it is snow and it's not gravel, so they can fall down. But I mean, you actually have to have your mindset right to be able to go that hard for that long. And so one way you see this negative self-talk coming in is people quit. They quit in the middle of a race sometimes. So that's one thing. You'd see it. The other side is when people realize this. So I worked with a professional triathlete who she came to me and she said, I'm so sick of second and fourth. And she started as a swimmer and a college track star. So to become a triathlete, then you just learn how to ride the bike. I mean, the bike racers cringe when I say just learned how to ride a bike. Sorry about that. And what was happening was, so she'd come out of the water first because she's an amazing swimmer and she could really ride a bike, and then she could really run. So if she came in second, it's fourth, it's because somebody caught her on the run, right? Because she comes out of the water first and she comes off the bike first. And given her track background, nobody should ever catch her on the run. So I asked her, like, what happened when somebody came up on your hip and you let them get away and end up being second and fourth? And it turned out that there was this voice that was kind of right back behind her right ear, about a foot back. And it was this kind of sing-songy voice there. When somebody come up on her hip, she'd go, oh, she's a really fast girl and I had a hard week and second's pretty good, and all this stuff where she would just let her get away. So then I had to break state, look around, focus on something else. And then it's okay. And then when you have somebody come up on your hip and you don't let them get away and you come in first, how do you do that? She says, oh, and it was her voice out in front of her, like about here, about a foot in front of her, left eye. And the voice said in this tone of voice, okay, it's not your day to win, it's my day to win. Just like that. So now we know how she wins and now we know how she loses. And what we did was take this voice back here, which turned out to be her at age 12, and grow that voice up to her present age and install these things. So that voice got satisfied. But what we had her do with this voice is every time she was running really fast, we had her say that to herself. It's not your day to win, it's my day to win. That way, those two things, her running really hard and that voice, became wired together. It's like when you flip on a light switch, the light doesn't have to think about what to do. It just the hell comes on. So we anchored those two things together. And for the rest of the season, she won every single race and then she retired. So that's the upside of getting the voices right, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Is there, you mentioned that Brodmann's area kind of associated with a certain part of the brain. Is there other sort of research about different areas of the brain that get like activated or stimulated for different like patterns of thinking like this? So like, is there negative self-talk usually concentrated behind versus in front of, or is that something that's still yet to be determined?
Yeah, the where the voice was coming from, that was specific to the individual. That's not necessarily part of the brain. It's the subjective experience.
Sure.
So, for example, another thing you can do if you have a negative voice that comes around, it's saying, think of another one different. You know, and everybody should get one, and maybe you have one like that. And if you think about one now, and you say, oh yeah, that one. Location is really important. So if you take that negative voice and send it back about, let's say, 300 meters behind you. Okay, and it's back there now. Now have it say that icky thing it says. Go ahead, do that. Meh.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
I can't hear you. So those are two really easy things to do with negative voice. One, you turn the volume down to where you can barely hear it or slide it down. And the other is you send it so far away, it's just like it's so far back there. And it usually is better to send it back behind you than in front. But for some people, it kind of works.
Right.
And replacing it with something that's more useful, like, and usually it's better to not make something up, but find something in your own personal experience. Like in a race, when you really were up against it and you prevailed, you know, what happened right then? Like with this one professional triathlete, she'd say, it's not your day to win, it's my day to win. We found that real thing. And we programmed that into her workouts. It became automatic on race day. And then it's just like, you know, when they find out that she was in the race, all the other women say, well, who's going to get second?
Awesome. Yeah. That's super helpful for that that example. I have one last question for this first topic before we get to some of the questions that have trickled in here. If you have a difficult workout coming up or a run that you're not looking forward to, are there things you can do ahead of time to handle the fears of the workout? So maybe one specific example would be the middle of last week, where here in Boulder, we got a foot of snow just kind of overnight. And then the people that had, you know, Friday sessions where they had to do like a hard workout, all of a sudden they have, you know, 8 to 12 inches of snow that's sitting on the ground. And they say, I have no idea what to do. I'm not speaking from personal experience or anything. But what would be an example for somebody that is coming up to that, you know, difficult mental hurdle that they have to get over?
Let's just pretend it's not something like a snowstorm that prevents you from actually going and doing it.
Sure.
You just kind of don't want to, right? Well, it goes back to that thing about installing the memory of the thing you want to have happen ahead of time, so that your brain is all peaked to that, and that's what it's looking for. So this little thing, and I like this little formula. First of all, well, what's the purpose of this workout? If it's let's just say it's a 90-minute recovery run. The purpose is to clear out all these metabolic products from yesterday, get me lined up for tomorrow. That's the why I'm doing it. The what is 90 minutes at zone 2, which on my stride for me would be about, I don't want to give away any, but let's just say 170.
Sure.
Yeah. And I want to do, you know, my stride, I want to do 90 minutes at about 170 with low variability index. There's a little bit of terrain here, so you know you kind of manage for that, and that's what it looks like. And then how that's going to help me on race day is I'm going to have a really good workout tomorrow, because everybody knows you don't get fit while you're working out. You only get fit in the recovery bouts after you've overstimulated your body to come back stronger, fitter, faster.
Right.
So this is while I'm doing this. And then you make this little movie in your head. What if it went perfectly? Seeing myself over there like I'm watching myself on a screen. Now it's a 90-minute workout. The imagined movie is going to be in full color, but only 20 to 30 seconds.
Right.
And if that feels pretty good, I'd step into the movie and do it from an associated position like it was happening to me. And then your brain has everything it knows. Cognitively, it says, here's why I'm doing it. The move towards pleasure is, here's how it's going to help me later. And then the Brodmann's area is installed with and dissociated first, and then an associated picture of how it goes. Your brain has everything it has to go up and get out the door. The other thing you can do then is to reduce anything is get everything set up the night before.
Mm.
It would be, put your clothes out and everything so that there's one fewer obstacle in the morning.
Right.
Figure out what time you're going to go. Line up your running partner if you have a 6 foot away from you running partner with,
Sure.
masks on and all. And then the next morning when you get up, your brain says, well, this is like watching, Frozen. Like, we know how this ends, so let's go. But if you start out with just get into your hard workouts without bringing your brain along, it just says, this hurts, this is bad, I don't like this, what are we doing here?
Mhm.
If you bring it along, it says, oh, cool, let's get on it.
Mhm. I find that interesting because that's usually something that I've heard in the past is recommending somebody, if they have a hard time getting out the door, oh, put your shoes by the door, put your running clothes out. Some people go as far as saying literally sleep in what you're going to run in the next morning if you have a hard time. Can you talk about any sort of mental strategies that you can relate with routines? So this is even, effective come race day or time trial day where you have to practice the nutrition, you have to practice waking up, the breakfast. Like, everybody already kind of understands that. They know to not do anything new on race day, but they might not know that they have to do the same exact thing every training day to make race day not feel like a brand new experience too. So could you talk maybe a little bit more about routines that people could enact and maybe why that's important?
Pardon me, I don't have it. Okay, just want to point that out. That so after some repetitions, this becomes automatic.
Mm-hmm.
So now when I go to the pool, and by the time I've spit and swished out my goggles, I've already done my workout rehearsal, why it's important, what it is, how it's going to help me on race day, and done my associated movie. When I'm lacing up my shoes, well, I don't lace my shoes, I've got speed laces. When I'm putting my shoes on, it's become automatic, this little 15-second routine that it takes. And when I get on my bike or do a strength workout, it has become automatic by doing it every time. And now I don't have to think to do it. It's just kind of like, when you're coming up to a stoplight, there's a red light on top, a yellow light, and a green light. I don't have to think like, what the hell is this? Like, what am I supposed to do if the light just turned from yellow to red? What does it mean? It just becomes automatic.
Right.
So routines become automatic. And if you install a really good routine, after a while, you don't have to think about it anymore. Your brain goes into automatic, and then it just kind of flows in there. So I'm a big believer on routine so that it becomes normal.
Awesome. Yeah, I've found definitely hard patches, especially in the winter, of just forcing yourself to get out the door, but practicing putting on your shoes and literally walking to the front door, opening it, and going to walk outside is a huge thing to help with some of those mental battles. When you're actually running and pushing through a hard patch, that's a different thing than just putting on your shoes. But we have a couple questions that have come in so far, so I'd like to get your take on some of these. And a reminder for anybody watching live right now, feel free to pass your questions along, and producer Gus can send them our way. So the first question here is, can relaxing your brain and not thinking about anything, including positive self-talk, help in those bad patches on runs? Is there any research on this? So this isn't even necessarily trying to force that positive self-talk, use that mantra that somebody might have. Is there any research on just relaxation during a hard bout?
I'm sure there must be, but I don't know what it is.
Awesome. Yeah.
What I do know is Bobby McGee, who is the running coach for the USA triathlon team, Olympic team, and the junior development program, what he will tell folks to do sometimes is to shut your brain off, just concentrate on what you're doing. So for example, for 100 strides, you might concentrate on your elbow swing. And 100 strides, you might concentrate on your footfall. And 100 strides, you might concentrate on your transverse abdominis or something like that. Just do what you're doing and concentrate on what you're actually doing. Right. It just kind of, your brain has something else to think about. But I don't know about research about turning your brain off entirely. And actually, personally, I don't really know how to do it. So that would be a different thing. Yeah. But I do follow Bobby's advice, and like on these hill repeats I was talking about today, what I was really looking at is the phone pole at the finish that I was trying to get past every time in the 60 seconds I had allotted to me, and I like focused on get by that phone pole.
Awesome.
So I wasn't saying anything, I was just looking at this thing.
Yeah, I love that strategy, specifically for things like hill repeats. If you're doing the same course and your only goal is to, like people talk about some strategies of, if you do a 30-second hill, try and get to the marker that you've laid out. You don't even have to have that phone pole. You could just drop a hat or drop a glove and just get there. And then if you, end up going past it, take that marker and put it where you ended up finishing and stuff like that. Like that's a super powerful, easy way to help you do that, I think. Next question here is, when I stop training for too long, maybe after a big competition, it's very difficult to return to a regular routine of training. You need a very long time to return to that normal sort of training routine. What would you suggest for long training pauses besides don't stop training in general? So maybe for somebody that has gone through a really long injury span, or they've just decided to take a little bit more time off, how do you kind of kickstart back into that routine?
Well, a couple things. One is you got to decide what you're doing this for. Like, it's a game. We're fortunate to be able to do this. Nobody makes us. There's nobody in it. Even the professionals who are doing it, this is the business they've chosen. Right? And so, like, what's in it for me? You got to decide what's in it for you, and what it would be like if you actually got going. Another thing you do is propel yourself into the future. Let's just say it's 3 weeks from now, and I look back on today and said, what did I do that day? Did I actually get out and get something done, or did I just kind of, let it fritter away? So your future self will look back on your today's self and say, what do you want to be able to say about yourself? And then the third thing is use your stride. Really, I mean, this thing measures all this stuff. It measures ground contact time, stride length, leg stiffness, index, and all these things, as well as your critical power and all these things. Well, where am I today? And where do I want to be at some point in the future? And then how do I map myself to get over there? Because you muscle up and do a Boston Marathon, which ain't happening today, but it's going to happen in the fall. And then after, you kind of did the big letdown, and, you did it, and it was this big goal. And once you achieved your goal, then if you don't have something right behind that to shoot for, a lot of times you just wander in the wilderness, just like totally lost. Totally. So I use the stride to say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And then where am I now? Use the measurements for that and start to build up. And the other thing that people can do during that time to get going is, instead of just jumping back into training, jump back into being an athlete. So go to the track, do plyometrics, do drills, do dynamic stretching and all those things, because your stride will measure these things. So instead of jumping back into training, maybe I want to do a 3-week course of plyometrics and drills. And I'm going to measure my ground contact time, my stride length, my leg spring stiffness, and those things I can measure to see I can get better. I may not be getting faster during that time, but I'm becoming a better athlete. So when I do go back into training and start to lay this stuff on, I've got a better base from it. So I'm, at an age where I'm not getting faster anymore, but I can still become a better athlete, because my stride is going to measure all these things detectably. I can tell I'm become a better athlete because I get all these measures like stride length and cadence and ground contact time. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I've enjoyed. I ran a marathon at the end of February, took a couple weeks off, and then I've been getting back into training, but literally just being able to look on the Power Center and see where I was 5 weeks ago when I was doing 10 minutes of run walk versus yesterday I did a 30-minute threshold, and I've been able to build up over the course of a couple of weeks, but just be able to look at those numbers. So be able to get back in that routine. It does make it very easy when you have all that data on your side. I want to talk about 2 more questions here before we get back into the set topic, and then if anybody does have any other questions, please feel free to send them our way.
This next question here comes from Andy. And Andy says, how do you know whether to run through the pain or pull up? So as in like dial back the intensity. You tell yourself to ignore the pain, maybe push through. Maybe you perceive that pain as negative self-talk, but then you get injured. So maybe what's that balance between knowing that kind of fine line between pushing too hard versus, pushing those negative thoughts away?
Mm-hmm. We need to make a differentiation here. If you have pain because you have an injury and a running problem, tendinopathy or a pulled muscle or something like that, that's a whole different side of thing. And probably nobody would tell you to push through that. If you have a niggling thing or anything sketchy, you just treat it like a full-on injury and you go to your body worker and you get treated, or you use your massage stick or your foam roller or your car buffer or your iCore stick or whatever it is. That's one kind of pain, right? Like my hip is killing me. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the pain that comes from really high intensity work. It's that hydrogen ions that separate from the lactate that create that feeling in your legs. It's the respiratory compensation where at the end of 60 seconds of flat out hill sprint on an 8% hill, that's really hurts. I mean, and as soon as you stop, you're still producing lactate, which is splitting into lactic acid and the hydrogen ion. That's still coursing through your system. It takes a few seconds. And that breathing like you can't breathe and your hands are on your knees and all that stuff, that's a different kind of pain, right? So if we're talking about that pain, you have a training plan, and your training plan is built to build you up to that, but it's always like one step ahead, giving you a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more that you need to respond to get stronger. That's the kind of pain that you should be able to, with a good mental rehearsal, like we said, like, why is this? Why am I doing this? Physiologically, what's happening? How will this help me on race day? And then the dissociated movie first, associated movie of going perfectly. That's the kind of thing where your brain won't be an anchor dragging off the back of the boat. It will be helping you get that done. And so, yeah, it's going to hurt. I paid good money for this. I'm going to get every little bit of hurt out of this. But Absolutely. If you have a running injury, running problem, that's a separate thing. And pushing through like that, mm-hmm. I don't think again, at my age, any little sketchy thing, I'm treating like a full-on injury, and I'm just dogpiling it to make sure if it's a running problem, I don't want it to turning into a running injury. Totally. So different things, pain, and the pain of an injury, a running problem versus the pain of, that I would get in my workout if I did it as prescribed. It's going to hurt about that much, and I paid good money for this, and I'm going to enjoy every bit of it.
Awesome. Last question here before we dive back into the set topic. If you are dealing with an actual injury and you start to experience pain, again, this kind of goes and ties back with it, I suppose. So how can you best deal with it, reduce it, eliminate it? So you mentioned the difference between pushing through versus knowing what is that negative self-talk and the pain of running that you paid for and you signed up for. You mentioned maybe some recovery stuff. Maybe this could be a chance to talk about, just for you as a runner personally, what are some recovery tools or strategies that you use in your own running?
Well, the one thing, again, when I'm doing a recovery workout, I want to do that pre-race rehearsal because I actually really want it to be a recovery workout. So let's just say, I'm running down the bike path here, and somebody runs by me, and he doesn't look like he should be faster than me. He's dumpy, he's got black socks on, or whatever. In the olden days, I could not resist. I was like, I should be able to run faster than that guy. And I click on, and then I pass him and all this other stuff. And there goes my zone 2 run. What did I just do? I threw away yesterday's workout because I'm not recovering. I compromised tomorrow's workout when I'm supposed to go hard. It was just like, why would I do that? Now, when I do my recovery, why am I doing recovery? Clear out these metabolic products, et cetera, et cetera. How do I do it? I stay in zone 2. I stay at 170 watts on my stride. And how is it going to help me on race day? Well, it's going to help me on race day because I'm getting the full benefit of yesterday's workout. I'm going to get the full benefit of tomorrow, where the money is. and that's going to do. And then I make my little associated movie full color going perfect. And when I go out, when this big guy who I think should, be slower than me with his black socks run by, I say, hey, you look awesome. So
Yeah.
that's where I think the recovery stuff. The other recovery tools are some things about if you do have some negative self-talk about, I'm not sure about it, if you transform that into something that's more useful by either, turning the volume down or sending it away, or actually transform it by saying, so there's a presupposition here that all your negative talk isn't negative, it has a positive intention. It just isn't getting it over very well.
Right.
So if you say, okay, like there's this voice says, what about your hip? What about your hip? Would say, well, what about my hip? Like, what's your positive intention for telling me that? As though you could have a conversation with this voice, like it was another part of you, and then listen to the hell what it says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it might say, well, you actually have been pushing it pretty hard and all this stuff. Like, try to find the positive intention, because even though the packaging might be horrible,
Mm-hmm.
You suck, you stink, you've always been a loser,
Right.
it is. If you say, what's the positive intention? Sometimes it won't answer you because for so long it's been trying to get your attention and you have been ignoring it. It's like, well, now he wants to listen to me.
Right.
If you give it some time, and what's your positive intention? There is a positive intention under there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find out what that is, then find a way to actually satisfy that. So I talked about this professional triathlete who had this voice back here. Oh, it's, you had a really hard week and she's pretty fast girl and all that stuff. When we asked what the positive intention was, it was to don't be disappointed. Okay, well, that kind of matters, right? And then we sort of satisfied that about, what it needs to be, not disappointed. What it turns out is lay it all out there. The clock will be the clock, the podium will be the podium, but if you did what you could, that's it. And once we got that voice kind of went away because it was satisfied and it didn't need to say it anymore. It knew what it needed to do. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's great insight. I want to hop back to the set topic we had, but this will be a last reminder. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them after we wrap up this topic here. So topic number 2, we've already kind of touched on a little bit: mental skills in training versus racing. So now in our current situation, like you mentioned, the Boston Marathon would be finishing, already would have finished, or finished right about now. If a runner is racing less often, how can they place themselves in a high pressure situation where they can authentically practice the pressure of racing? And we've had people in the Stride community setting personal bests by unprecedented amounts, just because people have really, really embraced this self-isolation, going after personal bests. But now, for people who normally rely on a racing situation to extract all of that mental will and fortitude out of them, what would you suggest for people that usually rely on that high pressure race day environment to be able to practice some of those things for when we return to a normal schedule down the road?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm going to take you back to your Stride, where Stride does not lie, right? So I might be fritzed out about, in this weird time, about my job, when I'm going to get to go to the swim again, are my family okay, and all that things. And you monitor your heart rate when you get up in the morning. A lot of people have an app for that, some heart rate variability app, and you just realize, like, my heart rate is like 5 or 6 or 8 beats above already. A colleague of mine on the D3 coaching staff, Simon Butterworth, was doing the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon a couple of years ago, and he called me the day before the race and said, I'm waking up here at sea level in San Francisco with my heart rate's like 10 beats higher every morning. And he goes, it must be pre-race stress. So we did some things to address that, right? And it kind of knocked it right down. So here we are in these weird situations, and stress is stress, right? It's, whether it's from doing, these really hard, 1K repeats, or if it's because I'm worried about my parents, whatever. So one of the things you can do now, though, is see what you can do to make yourself a better athlete. And if you want to put yourself in that situation, you can do some kind of, a workout with yourself against yourself on the stride, based on where you should be in your training plan, and say, okay, I'm really going to hit it. So on these goofy hill repeats I was doing today, I was trying to think, sorry, I can't figure out which way to do this. I was trying to figure out, like, what does it look like when I ring the bell? And for me, it's about 400 watts. It's a pretty good output. And so it's like, okay, it's all a game. So I'm going to game myself and see, like, can I hit 400 watts 6 times in a row? Because, like, what the hell? What else do I have to do? So that high pressure situation is between you, and how do you measure it? Well, you got your device, and the device, it does not lie. It doesn't matter if it's windy, it doesn't matter if it's hot, it doesn't matter if you're agitated. Watts is watts, right? So that's one thing I think you can do is, and then there's all this Strava junk where, where people are, king of the mountaining each other and all kinds of other stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to go against the best, the thing that's different is not being in the big crowd and getting the buzz ahead of time and psyching each other out. I worked with a professional triathlete, my co-author on the book I wrote, Craig Howie, and he had a situation where there was one guy he knew he should be beating based on everything, but he would never beat him in a race. And it turned out what happened is this guy had kind of psyched him out. It was the morning before, when everybody's getting their transition area, and Craig is down on his knee fussing with his, I don't know what, shoes or something. And this guy comes up in front of the sun so that the sun is behind his head, and he has this halo, and he's up above, right? So he's up above, like where we put people on a pedestal. They're above us and all that stuff. And he says something like, "Are you sure you have the right race wheels for your bike today?" or something, which freaked him out. And then thereon after, he could just never beat this guy, because here's this light, this up above, above him, where he's down beneath, he's up above, and it's this halo. And you can't beat God. So we had to actually undo that by having the image of this guy. He brought it down to his eye level, where he was seeing the picture of this guy, and he's like, "Oh, he's not that fast." And then that was the end of that. So anyway, so there's some things you can do to practice, like it's called social panorama, which is this whole branch of psychology that I work on also. So that's some things that are hard to get right now. But in terms of you in the high pressure situation, like, I've got my stride, I've got my course there, and I've got the measures, and I know the measures are going to be the measures. So what am I going to do to actually kind of ring the bell?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to touch on the one subject of the Strava, like King of Mountain or Queen of Mountain things. I think living in Boulder is probably one of the top 3 worst cities in the US to be living in to try and chase stuff, because you see all these Olympians or people that have been doing training stints around the res, and you're like, how do I even compete with that? But it's a fun kind of pressure environment to be able to put yourself in, which I think is a fun thing right now. So next part of this topic is, what other crucial racing skills do you see runners and triathletes commonly neglect? Is this a good time to reapproach and practice those skills now?
I think so. Nobody's racing right now. So let's say you have a marathon coming up. So you train for it for a long time. You have a week or 2-week taper period where you're kind of locked in anyway, and you don't get to train the way you like to do, and you sort of pace the cage like a caged tiger and all that kind of stuff. Well, during that time, what can you do? You can practice. You can go do some drills and plyos, just to do a little bit better. If you're a triathlete, you can practice your transitions. You set up your bike on a trainer, and you do your bike, and then you see how fast you can get into your running shoes and out. And 10 seconds is a pretty good time. So there's things you can do. And then also, if you do a marathon, then for the next 2 weeks, you're throttled back also. You can't train and there's that trail run that you always wanted to do, but I can't because I'm sort of, beat up and all that kind of stuff. Well, since you have 4 weeks back, the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after, what do you want to do with it? And it's like that run I always wanted to do. I think maybe I'll go do that run. or that ride I always wanted to do that would have interfered with my racing. Like, well, maybe I'll use this opportunity to do that. We'll look back on this time in a few years or a year, whenever, and it's like, all of the people from the World War II era, like, what did you do during the war? Right? They all say that. Well, we're going to look back and say, what did you do when you were bolted down? Well, I actually used it for this or that. And, I decided to do this thing. So my wife has got us on a round of P90X. And, that's what we're doing in addition to the sort of normal training stuff. And you know what? It's like, this is no joke. So that's what kind of we're doing. So
yeah, absolutely. Taking advantage of, the situation and working on those other things. I want to alternate some of the other questions that people have asked with some of the last questions we have right now. So the first listener question here is, we're in an unusual time right now, and that many of us are continuing to train for events that may or may not happen. So this is maybe for events right now that are July-ish through the end of the year. So we just don't know right now. Any suggestions on pushing through that uncertainty? Thanks so much for the great insights today. This is from Helena.
It's almost like scenario planning, right? We could have this future or we could have this future. So what am I going to do? If we have this future that the race goes on, I want to make sure that the day before the race, the night before the race, I look back on this time and said I did everything I could. Right? And you don't want to have any regrets about things that you wish you had done but didn't. Like, I just had this whole week where I just like missed a whole training week because I whatever. If it's me the day night before the race, what do I want to say about my training? Like, right. I did the work. Hands in the barn, did what I could, and tomorrow I'm going to have as much fun as I can, and the clock will take care of the clock. So that's one thing to do about this. Pardon me. The
hill repeats at 5,000 feet altitude give you that nice dry cough.
They do. It's really, that's what it is, really. You don't have to dunk your computer in Clorox.
Sure.
The other scenario would be as if it doesn't happen. So what's the worst thing that can happen if it doesn't happen? Well, I put all the work in and I had all this fun training and everything, and I'm pretty tuned up. So I have a little remorse that it's not going to happen, but I don't have any regrets for the stuff I did. So some part of it is like, why are you doing this anyway? If I'm doing it just to have a good race, then the training's likely to be a chore. It's work to get to the race. But if I say it's a whole process where I did this training and I engaged my coach, or I got a training plan and I did all this stuff and I did my little stretches in the morning and all that stuff along to the journey, and then the race didn't happen. Well, look where I am. Like, I'm a pretty fit unit.
So, absolutely.
These two scenarios, and one or the other is going to happen, or something else. Well, if this happens, I'm going to do it like this, and if this happens, I'm going to do it like this. And in most cases, you're going to do the same things anyway. So then you have no regret or remorse about anything. It's like, if the race happens, I'm going to do this. If the race doesn't happen, I'm going to do this. But it's all the same stuff, so it's a no-lose proposition.
Absolutely. One of the questions we had was, can you relate this situation to anything that you've handled in the past, either personally or advising some other people? If so, what lessons are you applying from this past experience to the current situation?
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, and we go back to, this was really kind of about negative internal chatter.
Sure.
Right? So,
and maybe this has kind of been one that we've been asking a lot of people is, the whole global pandemic thing, a bunch of races getting canceled, postponed. People have a bunch of different experiences that are now being impacted with. Is there anything that you are facing now, specifically, that you have maybe dealt with in a similar situation in the past?
Okay, thanks. Now I understand the question better. So in addition to being the mental skills coach for D3 Multisport and being a triathlon coach, and my day job, I do management consulting for nonprofit organizations. So everybody's scrambling, right? On that one, been doing a lot of redoing of strategic plans and redoing of situation analysis and planning for this uncertain future, scenario planning like we talked about.
Right.
And also, I'm the training director for a nonprofit that works on post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a technique. It's in the cognitive psychology realm called reconsolidation of traumatic memories.
Mm-hmm.
And it is successful. We did 4 clinical trials with 160 subjects, and 92% of them, it completely eliminated their post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Now, PTSD, D is a disorder, and everybody knows disorders are permanent,
Mm-hmm.
except for PTS behaves a lot more like an injury than a disorder. And injuries heal. Like you fall down, you break your wrist, they put you in a cast, and 6 weeks later, the bones are healed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have to do some rehab and all that kind of stuff, but it heals. So in 92% of the clients, they had a complete elimination of post-traumatic stress. It was healed.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm the training director for this, and we are doing these trainings for licensed mental health professionals to get them certified in the RTM protocol. And we get 40 people in a room for 4 days, and we do a training.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore.
Right.
So
Right.
we had to actually pivot on that and migrate the training to an online platform. And I was talking with Angus
Mm-hmm.
today about, if you look on the wall behind me, you see all the holes in the wall.
Yes.
That correspond to the bruise on my forehead. That's me trying to learn a new piece of software to migrate this all through, and banging my head against the wall when I try to learn this new piece of software.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is all happening, and we know that lots of people are collecting trauma now. They've had a loved one get sick,
Mm-hmm.
or they've lost their job, or these things that are kind of real trauma. So we're expecting a wave of trauma to be treated. About 8 million people in the US have post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think it's just military veterans, first responders. Oh no. I mean, somebody was in a bike race and they crashed their bike and they don't want to get back on their bike.
Mm-hmm.
That's a deal.
Right.
So personally, right now, one of the things I'm going through is having to learn how to actually train and certify 4,000 clinicians in the next 2 years how to do this, when my major training and certification tool just got taken away, getting people in person to be able to do this. And I don't know when it's ever coming back.
Right.
Having to move over to an online platform. Look, I'm an old guy with fat thumbs. I don't know about how this computer stuff works. And so it's good for me to actually figure this stuff out, because that's what we're going to need to do. And lots of people are going to need the treatment. We're going to need lots of therapists to do it.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, it's relevant to everything going on right now. And it's good to be able to transfer that set of skills and end up, working with maybe that positive self-talk to help it along the way. Last question that we have here from a listener is, would meditation help with performance and managing self-talk? I'd imagine it's an effective way to become more aware of your thoughts, which is kind of the point here. And this is something that we were talking about at the very top of the show of, that mindfulness and meditation is now more in the forefront of people's minds because there's more apps to get, the concept of it in front of people. And it's something that people talk about in running groups or online and stuff. But would meditation help with performance and managing self-talk?
Well, I think so, but I have to confess I don't know that much about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't really studied that side of things.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Bobby McGee, the running coach of the USA triathlon team. When you get right down to it, he wants you to concentrate on what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Concentrate on your foot strike, for 100 strides. Concentrate on your elbow swing. Concentrate on your hip position for 100 strides. That's kind of like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're fully concentrating on the thing that you're actually doing. But I have to confess, I don't know much about meditation specifically, and I haven't really tried it very much. I've goofed around with sort of achieving an alpha wave state in order to do some personal change work, but this is outside my experience, and so I could have just said I don't know, but instead I gave you this verbal diarrhea. But the answer is I actually don't know.
Sure, I love that. It's actually one of the things. I don't know if you've ever read the Freakonomics books or listened to their podcast, but the thing, like the 3 hardest words for people to say in the English language is I don't know. It's one of the things, but I really do appreciate the honesty there, because it's something that is still being learned about and discovered for sure.
And if this mental rehearsal is a form of meditation, where you ask yourself, why am I doing this? What are the physiological benefits? How does it help my race day? And then make a couple of pictures, motion pictures of your training or your race going perfectly, first dissociated, then associated. Maybe that's a form of meditation.
Yeah, for sure. We've had a ton of people send in some comments saying they really appreciate you for the insights given today and the expertise that you've delivered. I want to say thank you as well. Where can people find more about you and the stuff that you do? Are you on social media at all? Are you do you have a website that people could learn a little bit more about what you do?
I would send them to the D3 Multi-Stride D3 Multi. I had a chance to get it right. I did.
We'll link it down in the description as well.
The D3 Multi-Sport website,
Yep.
and where there's some bio about me and some of the things. Also, there's a couple of things. I did put together a book with my coach Craig Howie, the Four Pillars of Triathlon, and what we found there was that there was lots of books about sports psychology, mostly about what to do, like run faster when you need to run faster, and when it gets hard, don't give up and that stuff. But we didn't find enough about what to actually do about it. So, for example, if you have this negative voice, what do I do about it? Well, turn the volume down until you can hardly hear it,
Right.
or send it 200 meters behind you, or replace it with a positive voice in ahead of time by doing the rehearsal ahead of time, so that the negative voice never has a chance to show up, or find out what the positive intention is. These are all specific things to do. About everybody knows what they should do, which is not have the voice get in the way. Well, how exactly do I do that? Well, there's kind of 4 things you can do. And
Awesome.
Another thing I really think about, is again with the stride is, Dave Donahue is one of the D3 athletes who's, pretty fast guy in Chicago, and he starts as a swimmer. What he had to learn between him and his stride is when he run, he'd get so exhausted, but when he had his stride, he'd look at the numbers and say, well, the numbers say I shouldn't be exhausted. So it ain't physiology. What is it? And he got, learned how to pace with his stride and that kind of thing. So, I think there's some, if you go to the D3 multi-sport website, you can find some things. And the Four Pillars of Triathlon, the book, I think there's some stuff about that. I also very much like Bobby McGee's book, Magical Running. If you, sorry, let me get that there. If you actually want to look into something, he's got a quite good book that I think might be worth checking into.
Yeah, he was the second person to be on the web series. It seems like it was forever ago, but it was only a couple of weeks ago. So we'll for sure link those things as well. We didn't have any more questions come through, but I absolutely want to thank you again for your time today. We've crossed over the hour mark, and I'm sure people will get a ton of insights from this. Everybody really appreciates you taking the time today. We hope everybody is out there staying safe and healthy and getting some nice hill repeats in. And we'll be back with another episode later this week. But for now, this was this episode of the Stride for the Love of Running webinar series. Thank you again so much, Will.